I was hiding in my own house. Let that sink in. A grown man, fully employed, property owner in the mighty US of A, crouched behind a distressed velvet sofa with a pair of professional-grade, noise-canceling earmuffs clamped over my head. And still, the sound was winning. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical event. It was the sound of a disgruntled whale mixed with a collapsing skyscraper, and it was happening every day, precisely at noon, right outside my front window. The glass in my living room shuddered, a sad little tremor running through the pane. My vintage ceramic chihuahua teetered precariously on the mantelpiece. I winced, waiting for the inevitable, drawn-out fade. The sound, if you can call that monstrous sonic boom a sound, went on for a full, glorious, agonizing 10 seconds. Finally, silence. A beautiful, ringing, headache-inducing silence. I sighed, pulling off the earmuffs and rubbing my temples. See, this is the part where you're probably thinking, I live next to a dockyard, or maybe a highly active volcanic vent. Nope, I live in a perfectly manicured, utterly boring subdivision called the Picket Fence Estates. The noise was entirely my fault. It was my brilliant, petty, and frankly necessary creation. It was the air feature I installed to replace the water feature that had started all this mess. In simpler terms, I had replaced my charming little garden fountain with a full-sized maritime-grade foghorn, set to go off at 12 Huntwag p.m. every single day. Why? Oh, buddy, let me tell you about Karen. It all started about 3 weeks ago, in the blissful, ignorant time when my front yard still housed the original, non-apocalyptic piece of decor. It was a beautiful, 3-tiered fountain. Cost me a bloody fortune, too. Think Italian limestone, gentle LED lighting, and a soft, continuous gurgle. That gurgle, friends, was the sound of money and serenity. I was out there, watering my struggling hydrangeas, because I'm in my late 30s and apparently that's just what we do now, when the shadow fell. Karen's shadow. Karen, whose name is actually Barbara, but who acts so fundamentally like a Karen that the nomenclature has stuck in my brain like cement, lives directly across the street. She's the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac and, crucially, the president of our neighborhood association, HOA, which means she wields the rulebook like Moses with a tablet. She approached my newly installed fountain with the kind of solemn, tight-lipped reverence normally reserved for inspecting a crime scene. She didn't look at me. She stared at the gentle flow of water. "Leo," she began, her voice the vocal equivalent of a rusty hinge. I hate it when she uses my first name. It always precedes a declaration of war. "Good morning, Karen. Nice day for judging my landscaping," I replied, keeping my voice bright. Conversational, remember, Leo. Don't give her an excuse. She ignored the pleasantries, of course. "It's about the feature." She used the word feature like it tasted like old milk. "The fountain? Yeah, I just finished installing it. Took me weeks to get the leveling right. What do you think?" She clasped her hands in front of her perfectly pressed cotton dress. "I think it's a violation of the spirit of the neighborhood." I blinked. The spirit? Leo, the Picket Fence Estates is a place of natural serenity. We value the quiet enjoyment of our property. That gurgling you've introduced is highly unnatural. I looked at the fountain. The gurgling was minimal. It sounded like someone pouring a large glass of iced tea continuously. "It's water flowing over rock, Karen. It's what water does. It's been doing it for, you know, forever. It's loud, she insisted, leaning in conspiratorially, as if the fountain could overhear her. It disrupts my morning meditation. I sit in my sunroom, and all I can hear is that continuous, insistent splashing. Frankly, it sounds like someone is relieving themselves continuously into a bucket. My jaw dropped slightly. That's a new one. I assure you, it's just recirculated filtered water, not, well, you know. The decibel level, Leo. It's invasive. And I've already had 3 complaints. 3 complaints. Meaning she complained to her husband, her cat, and then filed the 3rd complaint with herself. Look, I'm happy to turn the pump down a notch, I offered, swallowing my sarcastic retort about her wind chimes, which sounded like 2 angry skeletons having a fight every time the wind blew. I wanted peace, truly. I just wanted my fancy, expensive water feature. Over the next few days, I tried. I turned the pump down until the water was barely trickling. It looked more like the fountain was weeping from embarrassment than flowing. Karen complained it was stagnant and encouraged mosquitoes. I moved the entire feature to the side of the lawn, nearer my house. She claimed the new angle somehow amplified the unnatural white noise directly into her sunroom. The final straw came on a Tuesday. I found a formal letter taped to my garage door, HOA letterhead and everything. It was a notice of violation. Excessive noise from water feature. The fine print claimed the sound exceeded the permissible ambient noise level, set by Karen, probably, and demanded the feature be disabled or permanently removed within 7 days. I stood there, holding the crisp, self-righteous piece of paper, staring at my poor, sad, barely trickling fountain. And something inside me snapped. It wasn't just anger. It was a slow burn, cartoonish desire for absurd retribution. You think my water feature is loud? I thought, my brain already short-circuiting into pure, unfiltered vengeance. You think a gentle gurgle is an invasive decibel level? Honey, you have no idea what loud is. The goal was no longer peace. The goal was to replace the auditory annoyance she hated with something that was technically compliant, because the violation was specific to the water feature, and yet so utterly, devastatingly worse that it would make her beg for the sweet relief of my original little fountain. And that, my friends, is when I typed "used ship's foghorn for sale, USA" into Google. The stage was set. The first watery battle was over. The air feature war was about to begin. The sheer, glorious absurdity of what I was about to do, installing an instrument designed to warn 1,000-ton ships away from rocky shores in a quiet suburban yard, filled me with a kind of manic, terrible joy. The first step? Finding a contractor completely devoid of judgment. This was going to be fun. The moment I hit "buy it now" on a retired 12-inch cast bronze pneumatic marine foghorn, originally fitted on a fishing trawler operating out of Gloucester, Massachusetts, I felt a kind of terrifying elation. The thing looked like an artillery shell crossed with a musical instrument. It was magnificent. The next problem was logistics. It's one thing to buy a foghorn. It's another thing entirely to install it in a way that makes it look like a piece of legitimate, if aggressively noisy, outdoor decor, complete with an industrial-grade air compressor, piping, and an automated timer. This wasn't a job for the guy who usually installs sprinklers. This was a job for someone who had given up on polite society. My first call was to a local landscaping company. I figured I'd ease them into the request. "Hi, yes, I'm looking for an estimate on installing a new lawn feature." "Certainly, sir. A statue? Maybe a nice bird bath?" the cheery voice on the other end replied. No, I'm thinking something pneumatic. A pause. Pneumatic, like an irrigation system? No, more like something that requires an air compressor that can deliver about /80 psi to a valve linked to a 12-inch horn. It needs to be mounted on a custom concrete plinth and connected to a digital timer for a once-daily activation. Silence. Then a slow, nasal chuckle. Sir, are you trying to build a homemade catapult? Or is this some kind of performance art piece? Neither. It's an air feature. My previous water feature was deemed too loud by the Homeowners Association. So I'm installing an air feature. They never specified sound limits on air. Another pause. Longer this time. We do fountains, sir. And nice, quiet, natural rock gardens. We do not do weaponized noise delivery systems. Have a good day. Click. It went like this 5 more times. One guy told me I needed an exorcist more than an electrician. Another suggested I look for a special effects studio in Hollywood. Apparently, the overlap between suburban landscaping and industrial sound engineering for petty revenge was non-existent. I was ready to give up and just buy a really huge plastic garden gnome, one that could maybe hold a passive-aggressive sign, when I found Mac. Mac didn't have a website. Mac had a laminated card tacked onto a corkboard at the back of a greasy diner. It simply read, Mac's Maintenance and Fabrication. No questions asked. And a phone number. I called the number. A voice like sandpaper and gravel answered. Yeah. I took a deep breath. I have a project. It's slightly unconventional. Aren't they all? Mac grunted. Give me the weird fast. I launched into my pitch, starting with the HOA violation and ending with the massive cast bronze Foghorn sitting on my porch, currently wrapped in a giant bath towel so Karen couldn't peek. When I finished, expecting the usual silence followed by an abrupt rejection, Mac surprised me. Okay, he said flatly. Okay? You don't need to know the decibel rating or that the neighbors are likely to have a stroke? Nah. Decibel rating is a factor of pressure and volume. Looks like a standard class 4 horn, which means you'll need a text $10 HP compressor if you want that full maritime groan. I'll run the line underground, hide the compressor in a custom-built, sound-dampened shed, and hook it up to a digital tamper-proof timer. How text? Shares $3,500, blodon, cash, materials included. Start Monday. I was stunned. Why? Why are you willing to do this? You sound like you're doing God's work, son, Mac said, and I swear there was the faintest hint of admiration in the gravelly voice. And besides, I hate HOAs. Mac and his 2 silent, enormous helpers, who communicated mostly via grunts and directional finger-pointing, showed up Monday morning like a Black Ops gardening crew. They worked with terrifying efficiency. The first step was pouring the plinth. Gotta get it right, Mac muttered, kicking the newly framed 6-foot-tall concrete base where the horn would sit. You want this thing to shake the earth? The base has got to be solid. Can't have a wobbly revenge plinth. The revenge plinth? I like that, I chuckled, sipping my lukewarm coffee. Karen, naturally, was watching the entire process from her window. She was doing her aggressive dishwashing maneuver, where she stands at the sink and slowly, deliberately wipes down the same mug for 15 minutes while glaring. I walked over to the makeshift construction area just as Mac was burying the thick rubber hose that would carry the air from the compressor to the horn. Hey, Mac, she's giving us the stink eye. Mac didn't even look up. They always do. She'll come over. They always come over. And like clockwork, 5 minutes later, here came the queen of the cul-de-sac, marching across the lawn with that purposeful stride, her face set in the expression of someone who just smelled a truly foul odor. "Mr. Peterson!" she barked, stopping just outside the boundary of the construction tape. What, precisely, is the meaning of this enormous, frankly vulgar foundation? Mac, who was currently wrestling a bag of concrete mix, stopped and gave her a look that could curdle milk. I stepped forward. "Good morning, Karen. This is the base for my new air feature, state-of-the-art." "An air feature?" Her voice rose in pitch. "What does that even mean? Is it a weather vane? It's far too tall for a weather vane. You know the covenant restricts structures over 5 feet without specific approval." "Ah, but you see," I said, pulling out a printout of the HOA bylaws, the same ones she had used against me, which I had highlighted obsessively. Section 4, subsection B. Ornamental structures taller than 5 feet require prior written board approval. This is not a structure, Karen. It's a sculptural mount for a pneumatic instrument, and it will be precisely 4 feet, 10 inches tall, not counting the instrument itself. I saw the flicker of rage and confusion in her eyes. I had used her own bureaucratic weapons against her. "And what is this pneumatic instrument?" she demanded, gesturing violently towards the large tarp-covered object sitting on my porch. "That, my dear neighbor," I announced with a flourish, "is a sonic harmonizer. It's designed to regulate the ambient atmospheric pressure in my yard, counteracting the low-frequency vibrations caused by high-traffic days. It's a health and safety measure, really." Mac snorted, a deep, silent rumble that I hoped Karen didn't hear. "This is preposterous. It's highly suspicious, and I'm contacting the board immediately. If this violates even a single line of the aesthetic code, you will be penalized." "Be my guest," I said, giving her a beatific smile. I made sure to cross-reference every section. If you want to argue about aesthetic code, we can talk about the giant, plastic, light-up reindeer you leave out until March. Have a wonderful day, Karen." She turned on her heel and stomped off. The defeat was delicious. The Foghorn, once installed on its sturdy base, was a majestic sight. It looked exactly like what it was, an instrument of glorious, beautiful, and utterly excessive noise. Mac and his crew finished the job by running the control wire to the digital timer, which was safely housed in the sound-dampened compressor shed I had disguised as a storage box for gardening tools. "You got the timing set right?" Mac asked, testing the switch. "Absolutely. 12 p.m., 7 days a week. And the best part? The timer is only set to fire once. 10 seconds. Then it shuts off. That's why it's tamper-proof. No one can sneak out and flip a switch and make it run continuously. It's a one-and-done daily event." Mac gave me a rare, almost imperceptible nod of respect. "You're a terrible human being, son. I like it. Payment received. Don't call me until the cops get involved." "The cops? I assume that's next." "Oh yeah," he said, getting into his beat-up truck. "She won't stop until the cops tell her to. And the beauty of your air feature is that it's not illegal. It's just a damn horn. See ya." He drove off, leaving me alone with my new, silent, massive, tarp-covered weapon. The countdown was on. I had installed my perfect revenge. Now all I had to do was wait for noon. The anticipation was already giving me high-grade anxiety and a low-grade, constant smirk. I was ready to become the neighborhood menace. The only question was, how loud was too loud? We were about to find out. The quiet before the storm was almost deafening, and it was going to be replaced by the literal deafening. The remaining days before the planned launch of the air feature were filled with an exquisite, nail-biting tension. It felt like waiting for a theatrical debut, only the audience was a highly flammable neighborhood, and the main prop was an air-powered sonic cannon. Karen, predictably, became a detective. She started walking her tiny, yapping terrier. Muffin, by my house at least 6 times a day, always lingering by the custom-built equipment shed. She tried the classic moves, pretending to tie her shoe directly beside the horn's base, aggressively losing Muffin's tennis ball in my yard so she could root around near the wiring, and one truly bold attempt to spray what looked suspiciously like weed killer near the perimeter of the plinth. I watched it all from behind my curtains, sipping tea and feeling like a genius spy. I spent most of the time preparing myself. I bought industrial-strength earplugs, practiced my most innocent, clueless smile in the mirror, and meticulously reviewed the HOA bylaws one final time. I wasn't just ready, I was prepped for a hostile deposition. The day of the launch arrived. Thursday, sunny, 72 degrees. A perfect day for sonic annihilation. As 11:55 a.m. rolled around, I went into lockdown. I put on the earplugs first, twisting them deep into my ear canals. Then came the industrial earmuffs, snugly clamped down. I positioned myself in the living room, near the window, but far enough back to avoid the worst of the window vibrations. I pressed the record button on my phone, setting it on the windowsill facing the street to capture the reactions, particularly Karen's. From my muffled vantage point, I saw the scene outside. Karen was on her porch, watering her prize-winning petunias. She was wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and looked serene, entirely oblivious to the auditory hellstorm that was about to rupture her peace. A delivery truck was parked 2 houses down. A neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was getting into his minivan, the perfect suburban tableau, ready to be detonated. 11:59:58 a.m. My heart was genuinely pounding. This felt less like a prank and more like a declaration of war on physics. 11:59:59 a.m. 12:43 p.m. It was 1,000 times louder than I had imagined. Even with 2 layers of hearing protection, the sound pressure was immense. It didn't just hit my ears, it hit my chest. It hit my teeth. My windows didn't just rattle, they flexed inwards like plastic wrap. The ceramic chihuahua finally gave up the ghost and launched itself onto the sofa. Outside, the world went haywire. The delivery driver dropped his clipboard and physically recoiled, covering his head. Mr. Henderson slammed his minivan door shut so hard I heard the muffled thunk through the earmuffs, and he looked around frantically, searching the sky for the imminent arrival of a freighter. And Karen's reaction was legendary. The force of the sound caused her to actually drop the watering can. She didn't scream. She didn't even cover her ears. She froze, mid-pour, her sun hat flying off her head, revealing a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Her mouth formed a perfect, silent O as the blast continued. The 10 seconds lasted an eternity. It felt like the air itself had turned into concrete and was being slammed against my house. Then, glorious silence. The kind of silence that leaves a faint ringing echo in the air for minutes afterwards. I carefully removed the earmuffs, then the earplugs. My ears felt full of cotton, but I was smiling so hard my face hurt. It was magnificent. It was monstrous. It was everything I had hoped for. And then, Karen moved. She didn't walk. She power marched. She covered the distance between our houses in about 5 seconds, arriving at my front door, which she hammered on with a rage that transcended polite society. I opened the door, adopting my most placid, confused expression. "Oh, hi, Karen. Did you hear that? Sounded like a ship was going down. So loud," I said, aiming for conversational and slightly concerned. She didn't use her normal rusty hinge voice. She used the full, bellowing Foghorn voice, which, ironically, wasn't nearly as effective as my machine's. "Leo! What in the name of all that is holy was that? You set off an air raid siren." "An air raid siren? No, Karen. That was my air feature. It just completed its scheduled daily cycle. See? I told you it was pneumatic." I gestured vaguely toward the tarp-covered horn. "That is not a feature. It is a weapon. My petunias are shaking. Muffin is under the bed. I think 3 different car alarms went off." I gave her my best imitation of a helpful neighbor. "I understand it's startling, but I assure you it's entirely compliant. It's a sonic harmonizer. It's designed to regulate atmospheric pressure. It's actually quite healthy for the local ecosystem." "Harmonizer? It harmonized my eardrums into mush! You installed a ship's horn. I see the bronze. I know what that is. You are intentionally disrupting the peaceful enjoyment of my property." "And yet," I countered, leaning in slightly, lowering my voice to make her work for it, "the HOA violation you served me was for the unnatural gurgling of my water feature. I promptly removed the water feature. This, Karen, is not a water feature. It uses compressed air, not water. You wrote the rules and you restricted noise from water. This is noise from air. If you have a problem, you need to call the board and argue with them about your own bylaws." This was the core of my defense, and it hit her like a punch. Her face went from livid red to a pale, dangerous white. She knew I had checkmated her using her own bureaucratic bullshit. "This is harassment. It's a public nuisance. I'm calling the authorities. You've gone too far, Leo." "You do that, Karen," I said, giving her a small, dismissive nod. "But just remember who threw the first stone, or, the first petty, self-important, legalistic letter." She stormed back across the street, undoubtedly already dialing someone. I closed the door and let out a triumphant whoop, then grabbed a glass of water. It was glorious, but I knew the battle wasn't over. Mac had warned me. The police were next. Sure enough, about 30 minutes later, 2 squad cars rolled up. I watched them park from my kitchen. 2 officers emerged. One, Officer Davis, looked weary and professional. The other, Officer Chen, looked young and very, very confused. They approached my door, and I opened it before they could knock, trying to project calm, rational, victimized property owner. "Officers, can I help you? I assume this is about the noon incident?" Officer Davis sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Mr. Peterson, we received multiple complaints about what was described as a naval alert system being activated on your property. We need to assess the situation." "Understood, officer. Come right in. I'd be happy to explain my new feature." I led them to the living room window, pointing at the tarp-covered horn. Karen was watching, rapt from her window. "As you can see, this is my new air feature. I installed it after receiving a violation from the HOA regarding my previous water feature. Apparently, the gurgling was too loud." Officer Chen frowned. "A water feature was too loud?" "That's what the letter said, officer," I replied, handing a laminated copy of the official HOA violation to Officer Davis. The complaint, which resulted in a fine threat, was specific. Noise from a water feature is restricted due to its disruptive nature. Davis skimmed the document, his lips pursed. "Okay, and this is what, exactly?" "This is a pneumatic instrument, installed on a custom plinth. It uses compressed air, not water. It's on a precise, daily timer. It is not continuous, like my fountain was. It's 10 seconds, once a day, precisely at noon. I believe it falls under decorative outdoor instruments, much like a large wind chime, only louder. Officer Chen was stifling. A laugh, I could tell. He looked at the horn, then back at the HOA letter, then at me. Sir, the sound generated by this device, it could arguably be considered a public disturbance. That's a separate violation from the HOA rules. Officer Davis finally spoke, trying to maintain some official dignity. I agree, officer, it's loud, I said, nodding seriously. But I checked the municipal noise ordinance. It strictly limits noise based on decibel levels during specific times of the day, typically before text /7 a.m. and after text 10 p.m. And it has special exceptions for things like construction, emergency vehicles, and short-duration alerts. This is 10 seconds, exactly at noon, well outside the restricted hours. If I played loud music continuously for an hour, yes, that's a disturbance. 10 seconds? Once a day? I'm challenging the limits of the ordinance, not breaking them. I saw Officer Davis's shoulders slump. He realized he was in a no-win bureaucratic nightmare. His department had been called out over a neighbor feud, where one neighbor had weaponized the HOA rulebook against the other. And you installed this device because the neighbor across the street complained about the sound of your fountain? Officer Davis asked, already knowing the answer. Yes, officer. I believe in giving people what they ask for. They asked me to fix the noise problem caused by my water feature. I fixed it by replacing it with a feature that uses air, not water, thereby complying with the specific violation notice. My neighbor, Ms. Barbara Peterson, is the one who insisted on strict, literal adherence to the neighborhood regulations. I'm just meeting her halfway. Or, slightly past halfway. Davis handed the HOA letter back to me. He exchanged a frustrated glance with Chen. Mr. Peterson, while this is monumentally irritating for your neighbors, and certainly a headache for us, you are technically correct regarding the time restriction and the letter of the HOA bylaw. If we issued you a citation for public nuisance, a judge would laugh us out of court over a 10-second blast at midday. We can't tell you to remove a feature that, however obnoxious, is not currently illegal. He looked directly at Karen's house, knowing she was watching the entire exchange. However, I strongly advise you to reach some kind of neighborly compromise, or we will be back. I'm always open to reasonable discussion, officer, I replied, maintaining my innocent smile. Tell Karen all she has to do is retract her complaint about the gurgling, and we can talk. The officers left, defeated. The victory was sweet. I had successfully used paperwork and a marine foghorn to repel law enforcement. I watched Officer Davis get into his car, shake his head, and drive away. It was official. The air feature was compliant. The next sound I heard was the distant, frustrated slam of Karen's front door. The war had just escalated from minor skirmish to full-blown conflict. The fallout from the Great Noon Blast was instantaneous and seismic, both literally and socially. After the cops had rolled away, leaving the distinct impression that they considered my lawn feature to be a problem strictly confined to the 7th layer of suburban hell, the neighborhood reaction started to crystallize. It wasn't unanimous. Oh no. In fact, it was beautiful in its divisiveness. The neighborhood split instantly into two camps: the Karens, who thought I was a menace to property values and sanity, and the Leos, who thought I was a low-key hero, a beacon of petty rebellion against HOA tyranny. On Karen's side, there were the usual suspects: Mrs. Gwendolyn from 4B, who believed all noise should be filtered through her own self-importance, and the grumpy couple who complained when kids played catch too loudly in the street. Their reaction was unified outrage, communicated via aggressive side-eye and the rapid, furious clicking of keyboards as they drafted petitions. But then there were my people. I started getting packages. One morning, there was a 6-pack of craft beer with a sticky note that read, 12:00 p.m. is now my favorite time of day. Keep fighting the good fight. Anonymous 3A. The next day, a foil-wrapped tray of homemade brownies appeared on my porch, tagged, "That horn is the most natural sound I've heard since moving here." A supporter. Someone even left me a nautical-themed cap. I wore it ironically, of course. The silent support was a lifeline. It confirmed that I wasn't just being a jerk. I was being a necessary jerk. I was the absurd, snarky champion of everyone who had ever been told their mailbox was the wrong shade of beige, or that their lawn grass was klar text, 0.5 inches too tall. Karen, meanwhile, was not taking the police's surrender lightly. Her first move was predictable, the emergency HOA meeting. The notification arrived by certified mail, printed in a tiny, aggressive font. The stated purpose: to discuss critical violations of the peace and the introduction of offensive, non-conforming industrial apparatus into a residential aesthetic environment. I showed up, naturally, wearing my nautical cap. The meeting was held in the cramped, airless community clubhouse. Karen was at the head of the table, flanked by 2 equally sour-faced board members who looked like they hadn't smiled since 1987. She opened the floor with a dramatic, almost theatrical recounting of the Foghorn incident, describing it as an act of domestic sonic terrorism. "And I tell you, neighbors," she finished, her voice trembling slightly, "that 10 seconds of ear-splitting noise at the top of the hour is a deliberate, malicious attack on the quality of life we have all worked so hard to maintain." Then she opened the floor for discussion. My neighbor, Doug, a big guy who spends too much time on his patio trying to read without his kids, bothering him, raised his hand. "Karen," Doug said, scratching his beard, "with all due respect, I now know exactly when noon is, and I don't need to look at my watch. Also, my kids now think it's hilarious. And let's be real, it's 10 seconds. It's less disruptive than the leaf blower guy who runs for 2 hours straight." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Karen shot Doug a look of pure venom. "That is not the point, Doug. The point is the precedent. If we allow Mr. Peterson to install a foghorn, what's next? A siren? A train whistle? We must amend the bylaws immediately to prohibit high-decibel, air-powered noise." "Ah, now we get to the crux of the matter," I interjected smoothly, raising my hand. "The bylaws." Karen sighed dramatically. "Mr. Peterson, you are out of order." "I'm speaking to the resolution you just introduced, Karen. I'm fine with amending the bylaws. But you see, if you amend the rule to specifically prohibit high-decibel, air-powered devices, you are confirming that my device was legal when it was installed. And if you fine me now, based on a rule you make today, I will simply file a lawsuit claiming retrospective application and discriminatory enforcement, specifically targeting the installation of my magnificent air feature, which, remember, was necessitated by your petty complaint about my original quiet water feature." I paused for dramatic effect, making sure my sarcasm was dripping off every word. "So you can try to change the rule. But if you do, you're admitting I won round 1, and you'll have to pay my legal fees when I sue to keep the foghorn up until the new rule takes effect. It's a lose-lose for the association coffers." The board members exchanged nervous glances. HOAs hate one thing more than loud lawn decor: legal fees. Karen tried a different tactic. The next week, I heard an unfamiliar grating sound emanating from her yard just after 12:00 p.m. She had installed a massive, inexpensive speaker and was playing a continuous loop of an extremely high-pitched, warbling opera singer at max volume. The idea, apparently, was to drown out the memory of the foghorn. I walked over to the fence, earplugs already in place, and yelled over the screeching soprano. "Karen, that's continuous! The ordinance definitely prohibits continuous noise like that after text/10 dulcendant. AM." She paused the music, panting slightly. "It's art, Leo! A counter-sculpture. It's designed to drown out your industrial menace." "Ah, but this is a violation of the current noise ordinance, not just an HOA rule. I think I'll call Officer Davis back. I bet he'd love to come back out here for some opera." She glared, realizing her mistake. Continuous noise was far easier to enforce than my 10-second sonic blip. The opera went quiet after an hour, never to return. The true escalation came when I received a letter from an actual law firm hired by the HOA. This wasn't Karen's angry typing. This was expensive, cold, legal aggression. The letter claimed the air feature was a structural health hazard due to excessive percussive vibration and demanded its removal within text/48 hours under threat of a temporary restraining order. Okay, game on. I needed my own legal firepower. I called my college friend, Barry. Barry was a personal injury lawyer who specialized in slip and falls, but was deeply enthusiastic about any kind of ridiculous, high-stakes legal drama. "You want me to defend a guy who replaced his garden fountain with a foghorn?" Barry cackled over the phone. "Leo, this is why I pay my bar dues. What's the angle?" "They're claiming structural health hazard. I need you to argue that the foghorn's only hazard is to their sense of entitlement. Our defense hinges entirely on the exact wording of Karen's original violation. Noise from a water feature is restricted." Barry was ecstatic. "I'm going to call it the water-air dichotomy defense. We argue that the HOA is engaged in a campaign of selective enforcement because they don't like air-based sound. We will stipulate that the sound is loud, but argue that the original complaint about the water feature makes this whole thing bad faith. Get me Mac's invoice and the decibel reading you took." Barry filed the counter-motion, requesting an immediate hearing to address the harassment of a homeowner acting in good faith to correct a specific documented violation. The legal proceedings dragged on, costing the HOA, and me, theoretically, though Barry was doing this for the story, far more than any fountain was worth. But every time the foghorn went off at noon, I felt a fresh wave of justification. I was miserable, though. I wasn't sleeping well. The stress of waiting for the next legal volley or the next neighborly sabotage was exhausting. I was living in a constant state of hypervigilance, and my internal monologue had devolved into a non-stop, sarcastic play-by-play. The revenge was sweet, but the cost was high. One evening, I found myself staring out the window at the tarp-covered foghorn, waiting for the 12 o'clock p.m. payoff. The horn was silent now, but it still dominated my view. It wasn't peaceful. It was a metal monument to my own stubbornness. "I just want my stupid, gently gurgling fountain back," I admitted in a moment of weakness. "I won the point, but I'm losing the game." But the battle wasn't over. Karen had one last desperate card to play before the hearing. I felt it coming. The tension was building to a final, desperate confrontation that would decide if I could ever live in peace, with or without a foghorn, again. Karen's final, desperate card was played under the cloak of darkness. I was startled awake at around 2 o'clock a.m. by a faint, metallic clanking sound coming from my front yard. It was quiet, tentative, and utterly out of place. My internal alarm system, tuned to the frequency of petty neighborly mischief, screamed for attention. I crept out of bed, grabbing the biggest flashlight I owned. I peeled back the edge of the curtain, peering through the glass. There she was. Karen. She was wearing black yoga pants, a dark hoodie cinched tight, and had a pair of gardening gloves on. She looked like a ninja who had accidentally joined a highly ineffective suburban paramilitary group. She was standing right next to the plinth, attempting to unscrew the heavy bronze bolts that held the Foghorn to its cement base. She had a massive, comically oversized wrench, probably her husband's, and was grunting with the effort. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I muttered, reaching for my phone. I didn't call the police immediately. I wanted video evidence. Specifically, I wanted video evidence of the neighborhood association president committing vandalism on the property of the guy she was currently suing. This was the climax of the conflict I'd been waiting for. I hit record and silently opened the front door just enough to get a clear line of sight, keeping my body hidden. "Having some trouble, Karen?" I called out in a voice that was calm, quiet, and absolutely dripping with smug satisfaction. She let out a shriek that was, frankly, far louder than my original water feature. She dropped the wrench, which hit the concrete plinth with a ringing clang. She spun around, clutching her chest, looking like a deer caught in the very bright headlights of my jumbo flashlight. "Leo, what are you doing up?" she stammered, her voice raspy. "Well, I heard a terrible, unnatural gurgling sound coming from my yard," I replied, stepping onto the porch, illuminating her with the beam. "Wait, no, that's not right. I heard metal clanking. Are you trying to steal my air feature?" I wasn't stealing it," she insisted, her bravado failing under the bright light. I was performing an emergency aesthetic remediation. This device is a hazard. I was protecting the neighborhood. By breaking the law and potentially damaging my property? That's called vandalism, Karen, and now I have it all on video. It's a great shot of the wrench hitting the plinth, too. Very dramatic. She wilted. The realization of the sheer illegality and stupidity of her action, caught red-handed at 2:00 a.m., finally hit her. All the HOA rules in the world couldn't defend her against this. If I press charges, you're looking at actual police interaction this time, not just a friendly visit from Officer Davis. You'll be stripped of the HOA presidency, and you'll probably owe me damages for attempted theft of my sonic harmonizer. What a beautiful conclusion to the legal drama. She stood there, defeated, silent, realizing she had finally pushed too far. The attempted sabotage sealed the deal. When Barry, my lawyer friend, presented the photographic evidence to the HOA's legal team the next morning, complete with timestamps, the air immediately went out of their lawsuit. They knew they couldn't possibly win a case against a defendant who was clearly being harassed by the association's own president. Later that afternoon, Barry called me. He was practically bouncing. "Leo, you won. Big time. They folded like a cheap tent. Their lawyer called it damage control for an unfortunate incident involving a misunderstanding of property lines." "What are the terms?" I asked, trying to sound professional, but secretly doing a silent victory dance. "They are officially withdrawing all legal action. They're paying your legal fees, all of them. And here's the best part. They're offering a formal, signed, board-approved compromise. If you immediately and permanently remove the Foghorn, they will officially retract the original notice of violation on your water feature and legally stipulate that your original fountain is fully compliant with all noise and aesthetic regulations. They just want the horn gone, Leo. They're terrified of another noon blast." It was the perfect resolution. I had forced the HOA to admit, on paper, that my original, innocent fountain was fine. "I agree to those terms," I told Barry. "Under one, Final, non-negotiable condition. "Oh, here we go," Barry groaned happily. "Karen, excuse me, Barbara Peterson, must personally deliver a signed, notarized letter of apology to me. The letter must specifically mention, and I quote, 'I regret the inconvenience and expense caused by my unfounded complaint regarding the unnatural gurgling of the water feature.'" Barry started laughing so hard he had to hang up briefly. The next day, the letter arrived. It was crisp, formal, and signed in a hand that looked like it was shaking with barely contained fury. I read the required sentence aloud to myself. "I regret the inconvenience and expense caused by my unfounded complaint regarding the unnatural gurgling of the water feature." Pure gold. I called Mac. He and his crew showed up the next morning and quietly dismantled the great air feature. It was a somber moment. "What are you going to do with the horn?" Mac asked. "I'm donating it to the local maritime museum," I said, "with a plaque that reads, 'Previously used to regulate suburban tranquility.'" Once the foghorn was gone, the custom cement plinth was left. I didn't want to dig it up. It was too much work. So I used it. I commissioned a local artisan to create a sculpture for the base. Not a horn, not water, but something equally ridiculous and intentionally useless. The sculpture was a 4-foot-tall, abstract metal turbine that didn't move. It was silent, aerodynamic, and utterly baffling. I called it the gurgle suppressor. And then I brought the original Italian limestone fountain out of storage and set it up right next to the gurgle suppressor. I turned the pump up to the maximum setting. The water flowed freely, gurgling and splashing with robust, joyous noise. Karen saw it instantly. She marched over, her face a mask of confusion, outrage, and deep-seated helplessness. "Leo," she hissed. "You brought the water feature back. It's still loud. You said you'd remove it." I smiled, leaning against my fence, feeling utterly at peace for the first time in weeks. "I did remove it, Karen. Temporarily. And now it's back, and it's perfectly legal. Remember your notarized apology? It stipulates that the complaint about the unnatural gurgling was unfounded. You and the entire HOA board signed a legal document confirming my fountain is compliant." I gestured to the shiny, silent turbine next to it. "And this? This is my air feature. It complies with the new aesthetic guidelines and is silent, thereby suppressing any residual sound pressure, hypothetically speaking. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to enjoy the sound of my perfectly compliant, legal, and wonderfully noisy fountain. You brought this fate upon yourself." I went inside, poured a glass of iced tea, and listened to the gentle, insistent gurgling of water flowing over limestone. It was the sweetest sound in the world. I had traded a 10-second blast of absurdity for a lifetime of sanctioned, perfectly legal, petty victory. The next day, Doug came over, admiring the fountain. "Looks good, Leo, but man, I kind of miss the noon blast." "Don't worry, Doug," I said, winking. "I kept the compressor, just in case." And I knew that was the real victory. Not the noise, but the peace. A peace earned through sarcasm, legal savvy, and a single, ridiculous, unforgettable marine foghorn.